Surprise, surprise. They just discovered something terrifying about you. Not because you disappeared, not because you rebelled, not because you have fought back, but because you stopped reacting. And the moment you stopped reacting, something inside the invisible architecture of expectation began to flicker. Error code, pattern, mismatch. Prediction failed. They don't have a literal control room somewhere. There are no men in suits watching you on giant screens. That was never the system. The system was subtler than that. It was the unwritten script, the social choreography, the invisible agreement about how someone like you is supposed to behave. You used to follow it. You used to respond on cue. When someone provoked you, you explained yourself. When someone misunderstood you, you over-clarified. When someone dismissed you, you tried harder. When outrage trended, you joined the emotional current. When validation was offered, you reached for it like oxygen. You were readable, predictable, trackable, not by satellites, but by patterns. People could anticipate your reactions. They knew which buttons worked. They knew which tone would pull guilt from you. They knew which silence would make you anxious. They knew which criticism would make you spiral into self-defense. You were operating inside a behavioral algorithm, not a digital one, a psychological one. And then something shifted. 3 weeks ago, or maybe 3 months. Or maybe it was a gradual erosion that finally became visible. You stopped taking the bait. You stopped correcting every misunderstanding. You stopped chasing closure from people who fed on confusion. You stopped explaining your peace to those invested in your chaos. And the moment you did, something strange happened in the emotional economy around you. The numbers stopped adding up. People who relied on your reactivity suddenly had no data. They offered provocation, nothing. They dangled conflict, nothing. They deployed guilt, static. They tested boundaries, no emotional spike. You didn't argue. You didn't disappear. You didn't attack. You just didn't engage. And that is what terrified them, because predictability is power, not yours, but theirs. When someone can predict you, they can influence you. When they can influence you, they can position themselves safely within the dynamic. When they know how you'll react, they know how far they can push. But when you become internally directed instead of externally triggered, the model collapses, not dramatically, quietly. You still show up to work. You still smile in conversations. You still scroll your phone. You still participate in life. But you are no longer performing on cue, and the subtle social algorithms around you are struggling. You used to defend yourself when accused unfairly. Now you listen. You used to respond instantly to messages loaded with emotional hooks. Now you wait. You used to absorb tension and try to fix it. Now you let it sit where it belongs. You used to crave reassurance. Now you trust your perception. That trust that restored self-trust is the anomaly. Because a self-trusting person cannot be easily redirected. They cannot be guilt-steered. They cannot be shame managed. They cannot be urgency manipulated. And here's the part that unsettles everyone the most. You didn't become louder. You became quieter. Calm replaced reaction. Observation replaced impulse. You began moving in ways that didn't make sense to those who had studied your old patterns. You declined invitations that once would have hooked you. You ignored subtle jabs that once would have sparked essays. You didn't defend yourself against narratives you knew would collapse on their own. From the outside, it looks like indifference. From the inside, it's discipline. You stopped feeding attention-based systems, not by deleting your accounts, not by running away, but by disengaging from emotional bait. You stopped rewarding drama with presence. You stopped rewarding disrespect with explanation. You stopped rewarding confusion with clarity. And when you stop rewarding behavior, Behavior either evolves or fades. That's not rebellion. That's awareness. The people around you feel it, even if they can't name it. They say things like, "You've changed." They say it like an accusation, and they're right. You changed. You no longer need the room to validate your worth. You no longer need the argument to prove your intelligence. You no longer need the apology to move forward. You no longer need to win to feel stable. You became emotionally self-contained, and that containment disrupts systems built on emotional leakage. Because many dynamics rely on your emotional output. Your outrage fuels engagement. Your defensiveness fuels argument. Your guilt fuels compliance. Your over-explaining fuels control. Remove that fuel, and the mechanism stalls. Not because you attacked it, but because you withdrew consent. You didn't defeat a system. You stopped participating in it. You didn't go off. Grid, you stepped off. Script, that's the real anomaly. You are still here, still visible, still present, but untouchable in the ways that once made you manageable. You became noise to expectation. When someone tries to map you now, they get contradictions. Calm when they expected emotion, silence when they expected defense, boundaries when they expected accommodation, stillness when they expected reaction. You're not random, you're intentional. And intention is unreadable to those who rely on reflex. The collapse isn't external. It's internal. It's the collapse of their confidence in predicting you. And that collapse forces something uncomfortable: self-reflection. Because when someone can't control you through reaction, they must confront themselves. Why doesn't this work anymore? Why doesn't guilt land? Why doesn't tension pull them in? Why don't they chase? Why don't they defend? Why don't they explode? Because you're not operating from the same nervous system anymore. You regulated it. You studied your triggers. You paused before responding. You questioned your impulses. You noticed how easily you were guided by emotional hooks. And you opted out. That choice, that quiet opting out, is what created the system failure. No alarms. No drama, just a subtle realization in the background of other people's minds. We can't move them anymore. That realization feels threatening to those who depend on influence. But you are not threatening. You are neutral. Neutrality is terrifying to those who depend on reaction. Because neutrality reveals their methods without attacking them. It exposes manipulation by refusing to engage with it. It dissolves control without confrontation. And you didn't plan a revolution, you just matured. You stopped outsourcing your internal state to external stimuli. You stopped letting headlines dictate your mood. You stopped letting passive aggression dictate your response. You stopped letting digital outrage dictate your attention. You stopped letting praise dictate your self-worth. You became self-directed, not rebellious. Not anti-system, just autonomous. And autonomy spreads quietly. People notice, they ask you what changed. They feel calmer around you, or sometimes more uncomfortable, because your non-reaction highlights their reactivity. Your steadiness highlights their volatility. Your silence highlights their noise. But you are not trying to teach anyone. You are simply living differently. And that difference creates ripple effects. Not because you are superior, but because predictability was the real leash. And you slipped it by doing the simplest thing imaginable. You paused, you observed, you chose. You didn't break anything. You broke predictability. You didn't escape society. You escaped compulsion. You didn't destroy a structure. You stopped feeding it. And now you stand exactly where you've always stood. Visible, present, ordinary. But no longer programmable, no longer reactive, no longer available for unconscious scripts. And the architecture of expectation around you is still trying to adjust, still trying to recalibrate, still trying to understand how someone can remain inside the world without being ruled by it. But you're not disappearing, you're deepening. You're not hiding, you're stabilizing. And as you continue moving through rooms, through conversations, through digital spaces, without flinching, without performing, without over-explaining, the quiet recalibration continues. Not outside, inside. And you're just getting started. And here's the part they still don't fully understand. You didn't become cold. You became precise. There's a difference. Coldness is withdrawal fueled by resentment. Precision is engagement filtered through awareness. You still care. You still feel. You still show up, but now you choose where your energy goes. And that choice, that deliberate allocation of attention, is what makes you unreadable to people who once relied on your reflexes. Before, your emotions were open tabs. Anyone could click them, trigger them, refresh them. Now access restricted, not by walls, by clarity. You've learned something subtle and almost unfair in its simplicity. Attention is currency. Reaction is endorsement. Engagement is agreement. And when you stopped paying into dynamics that drained you, the market shifted. The people who once thrived on your explanations now sit in awkward silence. The ones who used to provoke you into proving yourself now face the uncomfortable reality of having no audience. The ones who expected you to chase closure now experience the weight of unfinished conversations echoing back at them. You didn't punish them. You just stopped participating. That's what unsettles them. Because participation used to be automatic for you. You used to defend your character like it was a full-time job. You used to overanalyze every tone shift, every micro-expression, every delayed reply. You used to bend yourself into shapes that felt safer than standing firm. Now you don't. Now when something feels off, you don't immediately fix it. You observe. When someone tries to subtly undermine you, you don't counterattack. You note it. When a conversation turns manipulative, you don't escalate. You disengage. And the strangest part, you're calmer than you've ever been. That calmness feels like invisibility to some people. To others, it feels like authority, but it's neither. It's regulation. You regulated the part of you that used to crave resolution at any cost. You regulated the part that needed to be understood by everyone in the room. You regulated the part that panicked when misunderstood. And once that panic quieted, you became harder to steer because steering requires friction. And you removed it. Now when someone pushes, they don't feel resistance. They feel nothing. No fight. No collapse. No dramatic exit. Just stillness. And stillness is deeply disorienting to people who rely on emotional momentum. It forces them to confront their own impulses without the distraction of your reaction. That's why some people suddenly describe you as different. Not colder, not meaner, just less accessible. They can't reach the old triggers. They can't find the old patterns. They try subtle provocations. You smile, they try guilt. You nod, they try urgency. You take your time. You're not playing hard to get. You're just not playing, and the longer you sustain this state, the more it rewires your environment. Conversations around you slow down. Drama loses traction. Conflict fizzles before ignition, because conflict requires two nervous systems locked in reaction. You withdrew yours. That withdrawal isn't apathy, it's mastery. You learned that not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every narrative requires rebuttal. Not every accusation requires defense. Not every invitation requires attendance. You learned that the need to constantly clarify yourself is often a sign that you're in the wrong room. So instead of arguing louder, you adjusted your presence. You became selective. Selective about what you answer, selective about what you absorb, selective about what you carry, and that selectivity restored something you didn't even realize you had lost. Agency, you no longer wake up feeling pulled by invisible strings. You wake up and decide how you'll respond. Decide what deserves your attention. Decide what doesn't. And that decision, making power, quiet, internal, consistent, is what people mistake for mystery. It's not mystery, it's coherence. You're coherent now. Your actions match your values. Your words match your boundaries. Your silence matches yourself. Respect. That coherence makes you harder to manipulate because manipulation relies on misalignment. It relies on your fear contradicting your logic, your insecurity contradicting your standards, your need for approval contradicting your intuition. You integrated those parts. You stopped fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, other people lose leverage. That's the real shift. It was never about escaping anything external. It was about no longer outsourcing your inner stability. You don't need chaos to feel alive. You don't need attention to feel seen. You don't need validation to feel certain. You don't need the last word to feel secure. And when those needs dissolve, so does the control they once gave others. Now, you move differently. You speak less but mean more. You engage less but connect deeper. You react less but observe more. You're not disengaged from life. You're engaged on your terms, and that difference is subtle but seismic. Because when someone becomes self-directed in a world addicted to reaction, they become an anomaly, not because they're hiding, but because they're grounded. You didn't defeat a structure. You simply stopped feeding it. You didn't outsmart anyone. You outgrew the reflex. You didn't disappear. You became intentional. And the beautiful part? There's no grand finale here. No dramatic collapse, no applause. Just a steady continuation, a quieter life, a clearer mind, a nervous system no longer hijacked by noise. And as you continue walking through rooms, physical or digital, with that same calm precision, the recalibration continues. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. You're not trying to lead. You're not trying to disrupt. You're not trying to prove anything. You're simply living in a way that cannot be predicted by old patterns. And the more you sustain it, the more natural it becomes. Until one day, you won't even remember what it felt like to be reactive on cue. You'll just know that you're here, present, unmoved, unrushed, unscripted, and still standing, not outside the world, but fully inside it, on your own terms,